Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We are back with another Neurodiversity, and I'm your host, Darren Clark. So guys, we are doing this every single Friday to spread more awareness around neurodiversity, and we have had some phenomenal guests, and today we have yet another truly remarkable guest. Olive Hickmott will be joining us very, very shortly, and she will be sharing her story and knowledge around dyslexia, and it's going to be absolutely fascinating. So guys, it would be amazing to let us know where you are, where you're tuning in from. I've noticed over the past few weeks that we have had people from South Africa, from over in America. We've even had people over in Australia, Bali. The list continues, and obviously some amazing people from the UK as well. So guys, why are we here and why do we do this? So my name is Darren Clark. I'm a global neurodiversity marketing consultant, and I help organizations kind of get their brands out there with regards to neurodiversity and help them get seen and make them visible. So guys, we can't do this without you guys as well. So it's amazing to have the fantastic guests, but it's also amazing to have support from you guys as well. So without further ado, I'd also like to mention, say a massive thank you to Scanning Pens, who was our last show sponsor. And I want to say a massive thank you to Claro Software as our new sponsors. And please check this out. So guys, Claro Software are our new sponsors. Claro Software develops assistive technology software for people with disabilities, such as print and reading with reading difficulties like dyslexia, to help them achieve all the things that they can. They are remarkable software. Please do check them out. All the links to how to get in touch with them will be on our underneath on all the comments, and obviously into our section as well. So guys, without further ado, I would also like to mention that we have another incredible guest. We have Olive Hickmott, who is a health and learning forensic coach and author. And let me just read this out. It's honestly, I'm so excited to speak to Olive, and I'm just thrilled that she's managed to kind of give up some of her time to come on to speak to you guys. So we're going to be discussing a topic which I know Olive will be able to bring this more to fruition for you guys. But she wrote a blog recently, and it was titled "We Are All Born Dyslexic." Okay, so Olive had many dyslexic and ADHD traits in her life. She will tell the story of how she changed her own experiences and taught thousands of others through a network of trained practitioners across the world. After 20 years in the world of neurodiversity, where she's an advocate for strengths of these exceptional people, she has become one of the world leaders in understanding the connections between mental imagery and a whole range of neurodivergent diagnosis. I'm so thrilled I was able to read all that and give the justice to actually the amazing work that Olive is doing. So guys, I'm going to be bringing Olive in to speak to you guys, and I will see you shortly. Good morning, Olive.
Good morning.
I hope my introduction gave you justice to how incredible the work that you're doing.
Yes, certainly did that. Thank you.
Well, I'm really pleased. So I've been a massive fan of your work. And before I go into kind of more of the introduction and allow you to introduce yourself, I was really pleased when I mentioned that you were going to be on the stories. The amount of messages, inbox messages I had saying how incredible you are. I don't mean to make you blush, but how incredible you are, and how your people were saying, you know, that's my good friend, that's my great friend, she's incredible. So I was really, it was so heartwarming to get those messages. So it just goes to show you what you're doing is making a big impact on the world.
Thank you for that.
Oh, no problem. So Olive, as I said, I'm a massive fan of the work that you've been doing, been following the work that you've been doing as well. Would you care to just kind of introduce yourself a little bit and tell our listeners who you are and what you do? It'd be amazing.
Yes, I was when you were talking about software just now, I just thought I got to mention this. I went to school. Literacy was awful, and but I was really good at maths, so I went and did a maths degree for no reason at all, and seemed like a good idea at the time. I never used it since, I have to say. And then I started work as a software engineer, and I was really good at it. And so it's really interesting to see all these people later now, the software engineering companies and companies and GCHQ and people like that are actually noticing that neurodivergent people are really useful. And I was great at the job I did. And so it didn't matter that I wasn't great at literacy. And of course, I was a software engineer back in the day of machine code. So it was quite extraordinary. So that's
No. Please, I completely get it. I work with a lot of kind of assistive technology companies, and I'm always amazed about how they help an individual, being able to do what they need to do.
You see, I was before the days of assisted technology. We didn't have any of this. We just bumbled along the way we were.
Yeah.
And so I had a successful corporate life. And then I went self-employed 20 years ago now and started coaching people. And I was doing mainly health work to start with. And then I stumbled over something called the NLP spelling strategy.
Yep.
And I'm sitting in the audience going, "You do what? I don't believe this. This is ridiculous. You look up and see words? No, I can't possibly do that." And I'd never had a diagnosis of dyslexia, but I'd have definitely qualified for one these days. And so at the tea break, I went round other people and discovered that the people who were sort of secretary type jobs and very literate, yes, they looked up and saw words, and the people who didn't, and they weren't great at literacy. So I'm a bit of a cavalier. I walked into my special needs school on the Monday morning after I learnt this on the Saturday, and I happened to know the deputy head there vaguely. So I walked in and said, "I think I've just learnt something that might help with literacy. Have you got anybody who can't spell that I could practice on?" And he went, "We've got hundreds. Which ones do you want?" Wow. And literally, I worked with them one for like 15 minutes a week for about 6 weeks. And I was staggered what I could achieve when I'd only had 15 minutes. All I'd been taught was that people who are good at literacy look up and see words. That's all I knew. And I knew I couldn't. And so I started trying it out with the kids. And because they're in special needs school, they got all sorts of really wacky mental imagery. I had the lad who was, when I asked him if he could picture what was on the front of his folder, which was a football player, he's going like this, and he's wearing glasses, and I'm going, "You can't see that, can you?" And he went, "No, it's really far away. It's 2 football pitches away." And I went, "Could you bring it a bit nearer?" And quite suddenly he goes, "Whoops, yeah, it's on the window now." And he told me exactly what was written on his folder. And it transpired later, I discovered about him, is that he'd been locked in a cupboard in primary school. And so he had dismissed his mental images as not something I want to do, subconsciously. But he then got them back again because he was now 6 foot something. He wasn't a 4-year-old, so he didn't have to worry about being locked in a cupboard anymore. And I was teaching him how to spell and read with mental images. And it went on from there. There was dozens of kids that and I learned from those kids. I just kept on being curious and going, well, what's it doing? What's the image doing? I had one lad who only saw in mental images in 90-degree standing on their ends. So if I asked him to visualize a car, it would be standing up the car. And he needed a bit of practice to get them up the right way. So there was because they're in special needs, it was like we got the worst of the worst, as it were, which was great for learning experience, because then I could go back into normal school and learn and teach them how to do. But they'd already, the kids in mainstream school had got very little problem in comparison to the ones in special needs. But I learnt so much from them. So I'm always grateful to those guys.
Absolutely. And so how did you get into this, Olive? Because you say you didn't go down the kind of I don't use the traditional route of diagnosis. I mean, like we said, some people go down that route of kind of the diagnosis. Some people just know with regards to they're dyslexic. When did you kind of know about your kind of dyslexia, so to speak?
I was never diagnosed because I'm too old. They hadn't invented diagnosis in my day. You were just not good at spelling and reading or whatever it was. There was no label attached to it. And I'm sort of quite glad there was no label attached to it, really. And then as I'm working with, I thought I learnt this spelling strategy literally in 10 minutes. And I thought this is going to help kids who can't spell very well. And it's something to do with me as well. But the more I worked with the kids, the more I realized the ones who were diagnosed dyslexic were doing the same as me. And so I went, I'm probably dyslexic at this point. And I've certainly proved that umpteen times since. And so I didn't know I was. And now I work on ADHD as well. And I'm pretty ADHD as well. But again, I haven't had a diagnosis. But I'd rather work on how to help these kids than I would about being diagnosed.
Absolutely. I completely get that. Do you see that there's in all the work that you do with regards, so I'm dyslexic and have ADHD. I'm sure there's, that's what I was kind of diagnosed with at 36. I'm sure, to be perfectly honest, when I start looking at other things as well, there's probably other elements, that kind of traits that goes out. Have you found that? Because some people say that they have dyslexia, so to speak, but they don't mention ADHD or dyscalculia or dyspraxia or anything else like this. Have you seen a kind of a link so that if you have dyslexia, maybe there's something else that's linked to that? Have you seen?
Well, having become an expert in mental imagery, which I have to say I wasn't for myself originally, but I've learned so much about it. And one of the things that in the very early days I read was Temple Grandin's book, Thinking in Pictures. And that made me think, my goodness, that if autistic kids are thinking in pictures and they're overwhelmed by their pictures, I'm working with the dyslexic kids who have got good pictures but haven't got pictures of words. So there is a continuum going on here. Yeah. And recently I published a little chart thing, and I said the dyslexics have got really good mental images, but they probably aren't visualizing words. The dyscalculics are the same thing. They've got good mental images, but they're not visualizing numbers. The ADHDers tend to have a stream of mental images, and their middle name is normally distraction. And so you start off talking to them about A, and they've gone on to B, C, D, E, and F. And they're talking about F and you're still talking about A. And they do that because if you see a series of mental images in your head, it's very difficult not to go with them, if you like. And I always give the example, if you're talking about the Eiffel Tower, there's a kid that's gone into the centre of Paris and now on the cross-channel tunnel and now to a football match at Arsenal. And so you're still at the Eiffel Tower and he's at Arsenal. And that happens in seconds. And of course, it can lead to overwhelm. And the autistic crew are normally deluged in mental images. But nobody in school talks to you about mental images. And very few people on a diagnosis will even talk about mental imagery. It's just not discussed. And so a child who is overwhelmed by mental images and would rather sit and look at something that's really small so they can concentrate and probably sit in the corner and play with their toy rather than opening up to the rest of the world, because it's just sensory overload.
That's something I wanted. I know we spoke about this when we spoke before on the phone. I mentioned about sensory overload, and I said how it affects me personally, and you gave an incredible analogy on that, and it gave me the kind of reasoning, because I say all the time I carry headphones wherever I go and whenever I'm out and it's busy, and that element of needing that control back in the sense of putting the headphones in, listening to something soothing, or the classical music, so for instance, and you mentioned about the sensory overload, and that can be quite impactful, can't it? At the time.
Yes, and it can to anybody. You don't need a diagnosis for sensory overload.
Yeah.
And what's more, most people think it's external sensory stuff, but actually you can wake up in the middle of the night and you've got sensory overload because you're dreaming about something. So it's not only external, it's internal as well. And the way we work with sensory overload primarily is to help children get grounded, which means you're fully in your body and you're connected to the ground. You're not flying around in the ether, as it were. And that dramatically reduces the amount of stuff that's going on in your head.
Because you mentioned before with regards to sensory overload, and I find it really intriguing. You mentioned that you could kind of just wake up in the middle of the night and start thinking about things, and then suddenly you just get this kind of this overwhelming of sensory overload, which I never even. I've always experienced stuff like that in the past, but I didn't click the two. I thought it would have to be a physical thing that would go through then.
No, and when I've gone to bed thinking about something, I can wake up in the middle of the night and I say to my husband, my brain's on fire, sorry, I've got to write this down. So I keep a notepad by the bed, write it all down, what the important points, and then I can go to sleep. Because there's something really interesting about mulling something over while you're asleep or nearly asleep. You go round and round the same loop multiple times, if you've noticed, because you're sort of trying to remember it. And so if you write it down, you can say to your brain, have I got everything written down? And if you have, then you can just shut the book and go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is trying to remember it all the time. And when you're writing something down, you never write it down more than once, in my experience. You only write it down once. And so that's a great benefit.
No, I definitely agree. It'd be great to hear if anyone else who's watching this has certain strategies that they deal with. I have a tendency. I mean, I carry as well as my headphones, and I do carry like a little book around with me, and I tend to jot a load of things down. Maybe it's ideas or maybe things that I need to do. I'm not as kind of strict with that. I wish I was kind of more in a routine of doing those things, but it does. You are right. As soon as you can kind of take it off. I mean, do you do that? Do you do kind of to-do lists or anything, Olive? Does that kind of help you structure out things?
I normally do. Last thing at night, I normally do just a list of things I might want to do in the morning, just so I don't forget them. And I do a gratitude list every night.
Amazing.
And the other thing I should say is that after I wrote the latest book, two things appeared in my life. One was breathing and how we breathe and how that affects our emotional well-being, and also sleeping. And I'll just tell you about breathing for a minute.
Please
because do. If we I used to be a mouth breather all the time. I'm now a mouth breather some of the time. But what happens when you're a mouth breather is you take in big gulps of air and you're in your stress response in the top of your chest. So you're not in your relaxation mode, which is when you breathe right down into your belly. And so I encourage people to breathe in through their nose and out through their nose, and gently. So it goes like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and a little bit of a gap, and then breathe again. Because when you're in mouth breathing, you're in a stress response. And also you're getting actually less oxygen into your body, believe it or not. And the thing that I found that was really counterintuitive when I heard it was that if you breathe out too much, it's a bit like blowing up balloons. You know, when you blow up balloons and you go all worry, that's because you're breathing out too much carbon dioxide. So If you breathe out through your mouth, you're likely to lose more carbon dioxide. And lack of carbon dioxide makes your brain go hyper.
Wow, that's really interesting because, yeah, obviously, the breathing element to it, suffering from anxiety, ever since as a child, I've always had this kind of connection with breathing, in the sense of when, you get that anxiety element, your chest kind of feels like it's tight and all those other kind of anxiety things that kind of happen. And the breathing just becomes quite shallow.
Yeah.
You almost kind of fast breathing just to try and get that air in, and it is that kind of control. And
you notice the faster people talk, the more stressed they are.
Yeah, I naturally talk so fast, and when it's funny when like I'm doing now, when I talk, when I'm kind of a bit nervous or some anxiety elements of it, the speed I talk is just, sometimes it's ridiculous. It's and I do start thinking about, I'm sorry for the person who's trying to decode all of this kind of this noise, but the breathing exercise is absolutely key. I just want to share just a couple of things. Bucky had said that happens to me, which is why I have my mobile with me everywhere to capture my thoughts. And I think that was around strategies that we have to try and jot things down.
That's a notebook, yes.
To notice. Here's one. I don't have your name. Sorry, I don't know if. But it says in user, but it says wake up in the night thinking about Excel spreadsheets and sometimes emails, but they aren't actually Excels or emails I have already made. They are speculative ones. Which is it's just interesting how I mean, whether you're neurodiverse or you're not, it's just really interesting to find out how we try and, I mean, I think I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were saying how many tens of thousands of thoughts kind of come through our mind at once. And I think we can kind of, we can hold on to kind of like 7 or something. It's something, something like that. And to have that to try and deal with these things, because we generally say, well, we can, I'll remember that, and that's kind of you're never really going to remember that, to put down. So it's always good to have this. Mary Wilcox from Clara said, Oliver, you explain everything so clearly and you're so interesting to listen to. So Mary, with that, regardless, I want to kind of ask, what, if you don't mind me asking, what motivates you after 20 years of doing this? Because you seem to be just as hungry doing what you're doing now as opposed to when you first started. What motivates you?
There is millions of children who are very bright, who have not learned to spell and read the way that works for them. The way that let me just back up a minute. When you're born, there's this part of your brain which is just above the dent in your neck, which is where you keep your pictures. So very soon after you're born, and I'm a new grandma, so very soon after you're born, you start collecting pictures in the back of your brain. So that might be of mum and dad or the dog or something, or a favourite toy or something or other. So that's where your pictures go. So if I say to the audience now, don't see an elephant, you've probably all seen an elephant and now you're trying to rub it out. So that's how the occipital lobe works. And so people, when we're young, people have really good mental images and they all hang out in this occipital lobe. Right next to the occipital lobe is something called the word form area, or as Stanislav Dehaene calls it, the brain's letterbox, which is where you keep mental images of words. And when you're born, of course, you've got no mental images of words at all, 0. And so somehow you've got to start building up mental images of words, because that's what everybody wants to do. They want to be able to recognize words without having to break them down, and they want to be able to spell words. Now, if you're in the English language, we haven't got a purely phonetic language. We all know this. We would spell phone, F-O-N, if that was true. Whereas in Italy, for example, if you grow up Italian is one of the exemplar phonetic languages. So you write down exactly what you hear and you read it phonetically. And so it's really easy. You can't do that in English because it works for a bit, but it doesn't work all the time. And that gets kids really confused that it doesn't work all the time. So what I realize is that whatever system you're using to start filling up your word form area, it doesn't matter whether it's synthetic phonics or whatever it is, you've still got to, it's part of the process when you learn to read is to fill up your word form area. But the only problem is we aren't teaching that to anybody. Mm-hmm. So 50, I reckon, 50, and this figure comes from when I do a workshop, I ask the audience, about 50% of the people of the population are visualizing words, and they're probably so good at it, they don't even know they're doing it. So their attitude to empowering learning, which is my business, they go, oh, everybody's doing that. And the answer is no, not everybody's doing that. And the other 50% have never heard, like I was when I first heard about it, have never, ever thought of visualizing a word. Or they may have thought of visualizing short words, but not long words. And they may have letters flying around and B's and D's turning over and all that sort of stuff. So they're not reliably visualizing words. So I teach people to reliably visualize words, and then they can use whatever scheme they're using, like phonics, for a brand new word. But when they've seen it a couple of times, it ought to be put in the word form area, which is next to the occipital lobe.
Yes.
Because in English, you're never going to succeed with just auditory. I mean, for example, we have homophones, those wonderful words which sound the same and are completely different meaning, like where and where.
Yes.
You know, we're never going to succeed with just phonics on homophones. And there's actually thousands of homophones. So that's what keeps me going, is that there is these really bright kids who are really struggling in school, and they shouldn't be.
Fascinating. And would you say that, you know, because I mean, obviously we know the English language, but you know, whenever I speak to someone and they're saying, well, you know, we're learning the English language, they say it's so tricky, it's so difficult, and purely for, you know, a lot of the reasons that you mentioned then, is it does a very tricky language. I want to bring on to the title, which I found really intriguing. And if you don't mind answering kind of your thoughts on this. And one of the things that you mentioned was you put out, we can phrase it as we are all born dyslexic, or are we all born dyslexic, depending on how someone wants to take that question. Could you elaborate on this? Because I know you wrote an incredible blog, which I shared, which got some really great conversation going, and I know it got some conversation with yourself. It'd be amazing if you could elaborate on this.
There are days when my dyslexic ADHD brain just loses patience, really, and I go, hang on a second, we all start off. I mean, the thing is, to be fluent in English, you need all your words in your word form area, and we're born without one. So my definition was, we must all be dyslexic when we're born. And so what we're doing is we're developing their word form area. Well, we're developing their ability to decode, but that decoding isn't the answer. It isn't the end point. Having words in the word form area is the end point, because every school knows that they want the children to be doing word recognition. And you can hear it when a child reads a sentence, whether they're going slow over a word, which is where they're decoding it, or whether they're recognizing it. And I'm really good at spotting whether they do that now. And so we just developed really simple techniques for filling up children's word form area. And I'll give you an example. I had a little lad on Zoom this week who was good at reading, and was actually, it was a girl, come to think of it, was good at reading and not good at spelling. And in half an hour, she got it, and she learnt how to spell visually. And she came back another week, 10 days later, and she basically got the whole process. She was now spelling properly. She wouldn't stop grinning, and she was extremely happy. And her mum was saying, why wasn't she taught this when she was 4 years old? Because What should happen, in my opinion, is this should be taught in parallel with phonics when you're 4. You shouldn't wait until happenstance almost that phonics is going to generate words in the word form area, because it's chance. Whereas if you teach people how to do it, it's not chance anymore.
That's really interesting. And I guess, with regards to kind of the dyslexia side of it within schools, I mean, I've mentioned this many times, I think, teaching is such an incredible job and a very difficult job. And again, to have all the tools to be able to support someone with neurodiversity, maybe dyslexia in their classroom, as well as the other students, can be a big task. And hence I can see, from stories that we've all shared, that people have kind of been held back in the education system without, actively noticing that child has dyslexia. And we're talking kind of ages, like you said, at 4, as a very young age, and it can really kind of change the educational for that child's purpose with those elements of support.
I mean, I would teach every child how to visualize words at the same time as whatever system you're doing for decoding words.
Yeah.
Without a shadow of doubt. There is a really simple way to test somebody for dyslexia, which, I mean, the educational psychologists have got a really complicated way, and it costs a lot of money, but the teachers can actually just check whether a child is visualizing words. If they're not visualizing words, they are never going to be fluent in the English language. And you can ask them. I ask kids all the time. I go, for example, when you go to spell the word lion, can you see it? I say to them things like, when you spell giraffe, how many R's and how many F's? Because actually phonics doesn't help you with that. Yeah. And so you have to be able to see the word. And the kids' reaction when they're young, especially the 9-year-old I was working with last week, was, oh, I can do that. I didn't realize that's what I was meant to be doing.
Do you think then it's, I think I've mentioned this before in the past, but the confidence for a child, installing that confidence in them, because we think about a task, for instance, when you mentioned, spell giraffe, I was thinking to myself, my goodness, how do you even spell giraffe? It was kind of these, so straight away, I think if it's a child element, if you're given a task, you have that kind of, oh my goodness, I'm don't know how to do it. So that confidence level drops massively. So do you think, not only installing the confidence element to a child, but obviously giving them, the tools to do it can really kind of benefit that child, can that?
Absolutely. And what you're doing is you're teaching them, 4-year-olds are highly visual. I mean, I've got NASA research about being highly visual when you're 4-year-old. So 4-year-olds are highly visual, so they don't have a problem visualizing things. It's only as we get older that we lose that creativity through school and as an adult. But when they're 4 years old, their whole world is pictures in their brain, basically. And so they very easily visualize pictures. They can therefore very easily visualize words and pictures put together. And we've just developed a really simple way of doing it. And it works all the time. I mean, some people might come back and say, oh, well, I can't visualize. Well, actually, if you talk to a 4-year-old, there is unbelievably few 4-year-olds who can't visualize. Sometimes, like the lad I was telling you about earlier, sometimes when they get older, some trauma has happened to them and they've locked away their pictures. They don't want to visualize. But when they're 4, they can, what I always say is, and there's a video on my YouTube channel, is making friends with your mental images so that you're in control of them. They're not in control of you.
That's really fascinating, and I've watched some of the videos that you put out, which has been really educational and intriguing, and it does spark that that debate inside it. Why do you think we lose that creativity? I mean, if you think at the age of 4, where a child is has this kind of high level of visualization, and then as we go on through kind of secondary school and in adulthood, why is it, do you think, that we lose that element?
Well, I could just speculate here. I mean, the NASA research is worth looking at, which is about how 4-year-olds are basically 98% are creative geniuses. And as we go through school, we lose it. And by the time we're adults, and they did this work for NASA, by the time we're adults, we're down to 2% of the population of creative geniuses. And of course, NASA wanted to recruit creative geniuses, which is how the research happened. And they did a longitudinal study over 15 years, I think, and saw how it got less. And why it got less is that there is very little in school on arts, if you like. I mean, after the pandemic, I just saw a report the other day, there's going to be less. It's very much all driven with words, either reading words or spelling words. There's not a lot of creativity. And I think it's one of those things, I mean, I am speculating here, that if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
My experience, I'll just tell you, with my mental images was when I first found this out, I thought I had no mental images. And what I've realized is that my mental images are so fast that I find it difficult to hold on to them. But the funny thing was, I've had mental images of numbers. That's how I got a maths degree. You can't get a maths degree without having mental images of numbers, I assure you. It would have been impossible. And that's why a lot of people struggle with maths, because they haven't got mental images of numbers.
That's really, really interesting. And I guess, you think about the, most workplaces, like, I guess, and again, I'm only speculating on these sides of it as well. There is that conformity of, that creativity sometimes is just given to maybe just one department within maybe the marketing side of a business or something else. And, and I always remember as a child, all I was kind of told was, oh, Darren, he's a bit of a dreamer, as if it was a derogatory thing, like, so and it is that kind of thing that's put on someone. Oh, he's always kind of, away in the clouds. He's always a dreamer. And you're thinking, but surely that's a good thing.
And that's exactly what kids with good mental imagery do, is that, I mean, and do you know the statement of the teacher says, the answer's not on the ceiling. Well, when kids are looking up, the answer is on the ceiling. Wow. And that's why they are doing that. I mean, we've gone through so many little things like that of people's expressions and why people fail, that we actually know the answer to all of this lot. And when you're, if anybody's done any NLP, when you're looking up, you're in your visual field. When you're looking sideways, you're in auditory. And when you're looking down, you're in emotions. So I'd just like to say something about this. When you get a child to look down all the time and they're not good at reading, what are you doing? You're putting them back into a stress response. Wow. If you get them to pick the book up, pick the book up, tip it up. When you sit and read, where are you sitting and reading? Normally, you've got the book propped up. Or if it's really bad, you can get the book right up there, like you hold a newspaper. But if you're flat on the table, you knock the child straight back into a stress response. Gosh. And I have had arguments with head teachers who say, oh, they've got to be able to move their finger along where the word is. And I go, well, do you want them to be stressed to hell? Because that's what they're doing if they're looking down all the time.
I think I mentioned this on last week's Neurodiversity Stories. We had a gentleman called Kieran on, and it was and it's really relevant to what you were kind of saying and how the educational system kind of the structure works, in the sense of, the conformity is to come in and sit at a desk in a certain position and then, get your books out and then be taught in a certain, traditional way. And I think we touched on the fact of we have a lot more freedom when we're working for ourselves, because we can get stand-up desks, we can take more breaks than we need to, and all these other different elements that we can bring in. But I guess for a child, when they're having to kind of conform in a certain way, and they may learn differently, it can be quite suffocating for that child, can't it?
Exactly. And these kids are really talented. I mean, that we say they learn differently. Well, I'm not even sure which is what's normal, if you like. I mean, I would say they learn normally. I think to have good mental imagery is a fantastic skill, and they've all got it when they're 4. So why are they losing it? And the late Sir Ken Robinson did a load of work on creativity and why children lose creativity as they get older. And so he's a great reference to look at.
Absolutely. I'm going to just bring on a couple of, so Mary Wilcox from Clary said, I wish I'd known the importance of visualizing words when I was in primary school. When I was a primary school teacher, I focused too much on the phonics, which was really...
Well, I have a letter to make Mary feel a bit better. I wrote to the minister of whatever it was some time ago, a few years ago now, when phonics was first coming in. And he said his first paragraph was, yes, you can teach, since some date or other, teachers have been able to teach whatever way they like. And the second paragraph was, and you will only teach phonics for literacy.
There's no words. We have a Ruth Fenton. She said, very interesting. I found it easier to learn Chinese than English because it's very visual, using characters plus simple sentence structures. That's really interesting because I think of, I do martial arts, and we have to kind of learn a certain type of, Korean language with that. But that's really interesting to learn as a language. I think that is very
and of course, Chinese is a very visual language. So you grow up having to be able to visualize the character, whatever they call them in Chinese. Can I just pick up on a question here from Mary?
Please do, yes.
Schools focus on maths and English because that's what they're judged on. I totally agree with you. And I had a really interesting conversation when I was training in one primary school with one reception year teacher who was really difficult when I was training because she'd got a lot of experience of dyslexia, including her own son. So she was a bit of a nightmare, but she actually ended up as one of the best teachers that I've probably ever trained. And she combined her phonics lessons with visualizing. And it was so subtle, you wouldn't believe. And it was so easy. And the sad thing was, she turned around to me at the end of the day and she said, the only thing is Ofsted won't notice that I've changed what I'm doing, because Ofsted are measuring me on the phonics. They're not measuring me on the child looking up and seeing the word, but that's what I know they're doing. Wow. And so the big bonus was she was teaching both together, which was absolutely great. The downside was Ofsted still doesn't know.
Yeah, no, I'm going to bring in, we have Kelly Holbrook. She said, Mary Wilcox, I'm still having this at the moment. My son is missing over half of his PE sessions every week to do Nessie. And whilst I'd appreciate he needs the additional support, this is affecting his mental health. And I'm really battling to change this. That's from Kelly Holbrook.
Kelly, teach him to visualize words. If you don't know how to do it, contact me.
Wonderful.
I'll help you.
That's absolutely wonderful. Can I just get your views? We mentioned around kind of dyslexia, and I know we touched on ADHD. What's your when you have a child with ADHD? Is it with your techniques of visualizing? Do you find that that's not easier to do, but the process you put for that child, do you find that quite an easier process to get them to visualize, or a more difficult one?
Well, to start with, I'll just answer something slightly different. Is that quite often the kids with dyslexia are so stressed they end up looking like ADHD because they can't concentrate, because whenever they look at the book, it doesn't make any sense to them, sort of thing. So they actually get labeled as ADHD quite easily. But with ADHD, the first thing to do is to make sure people are in control of their mental images, because most of the ADHDers aren't. They have this problem of going A, B, C, D, E, F. And so if you can get them grounded and you can get them breathing properly, and by the way, they need to be able to sleep as well, which is another thing that they tend to be really short of because their brains are so excited. So if you can get those three things to get them in control of their mental images, their ADHD will be much less.
I totally agree. The element of getting myself off to sleep, I guess, my element of ADHD, to try and slow down the mind, and I think of, from a child's point of view, to try and slow that mind down, it does become quite, I know that there's kind of a long routine where it's kind of, you have to kind of notify that there's, bedtime's come in, and then it's kind of then a routine and then a story and these kind of things. And that kind of gradually takes the child into kind of an understanding that, to try and calm that element. But I know for myself, it sometimes takes a long time to try and switch off.
There is, I did some webinars for Global Sleep Day, which was the 17th of March. And they're not up on my YouTube channel, but they will be shortly. I did them for somebody else's YouTube channel, and I'm going to copy them across. But there is some techniques about getting people to sleep, about things like having an hour's calm down time. There is, don't use bright white light, don't use computers because they issue blue light. The thing about light I never even understood when my kids were little, and I wish I had. That of course in the morning a sunrise is bluey colour, and in the evening a sunset is reddy colour. So basically that's what you're trying to generate. So in the morning you can have bright white light, but if you go to the toilet in the middle of the night and you turn on the bright white light, your melatonin will get lost. And it's because your body is going, oh, it's morning, fine, and then you try and go back to sleep and get to sleep again, and it doesn't work. Whereas if you use a red light, which is what people are now recommending for babies, so that if you get up for feed a baby or nappy change in the middle of the night, you use a red light, then it doesn't wake them up completely. And so there is great things like that to learn about sleep that I never knew. My kids are 35 now, and I wish I'd known that 35 years ago.
That is so intriguing. I'd love to. Yeah, please do. If you've got, if you can share that, I'd be, the first one clicking on to watch that. I find that so intriguing. And you're absolutely right. Is that nature element of the sunset and the sun, the sunrise and the sunset. And I didn't even think. I mean, I knew the kind of the screens element of how it kind of projects and how it kind of, people taking their mobile devices to bed and scrolling through and then putting it on the side and then expecting to just be able to just sort of switch off, can be quite tricky. But I never even thought about the light, the natural light coming through. That's really intriguing.
I've been working all these things on myself as well, and they really work. And so I go to bed at the same time every night. That's another one. Is that the only way you're going to get your circadian rhythm synchronized, so that you do is by doing the same thing every day. So you're telling your body that at 10 o'clock at night you go to bed, and by 10:30 you're asleep, sort of thing. And from 9 o'clock till 10 o'clock you don't watch scary films, because I don't know what your ADHD brain is like, but if I do that, then if I watch a whodunit, I have a terrible habit, and I think this is a pretty ADHD one, is trying to spot the errors in the film or the program. And that can't possibly have been him. He couldn't have done it because of X, Y, and Z. And so if I go to bed with that on my mind, then I can't get to sleep.
I'm almost, when it kind of ends, I'm thinking, I'm trying to analyze it too much. You shouldn't have ended that way. That character should have worn out. He should have done this. I'm thinking, my partner's going, it's okay. It was just a program. And I'm thinking, yeah, but they could have done this. Your mind just races away and takes away the originality of what it was about.
Absolutely.
Oliver, we're coming up to our time, and I am even, to scratch the surface on what I'd like to talk to you about, but it's been absolutely incredible having and learning from you, all of your knowledge. I would love to have you back on the show and carry on this discussion, because I know there's so much value that you can offer on this. Is there if people wanted to get in contact with you, or see your blogs or get your books or anything, how would they be able to get in contact with you?
The easiest thing is Olive Hickmott, because you've got that on the screen, .co.uk. That's where the blog is. And you will find there also the website called Empowering Learning. I run training courses for teachers, parents, coaches, practitioners, you name it. The latest book was The Elephants in the Classroom. I don't know if that comes out the right way round on the screen.
Yes, it does. It does for me.
Yes, the that was the latest one. And of course, calling it the elephants in the classroom, I now found another 3 elephants. So that predates my work on breathing and sleeping. You're more than welcome to look at, I did loads of stuff on YouTube with short videos, and something that fits in with what Darren does is that in, I think it was October, it might have been November, for Dyslexia Awareness Month or ADHD Awareness Month, I did a blog every day on success stories. So they are really short. They're like 3 or 5 minutes maximum of what some of my clients have done. I still coach people, but I do have a network of practitioners around the world now who I can put you in touch with. But I still coach people over Zoom.
But I will put as many links as I can onto the comments, and when we upload this onto our YouTube channel, I'll put the links on there. But you know, the comments are coming in that, you know, of how incredible they found this session, and I've, you know, truly have learned so much every time I'm speaking to you. And I would say to everyone, if you haven't connected with Olive, then please do. She has a huge wealth of knowledge on her channels and her videos as well, over on Facebook and on LinkedIn. So please do connect with her. Olive, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Neurodiversity Stories. I know how incredibly busy you are, so I do appreciate your time. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I will catch up with you very, very soon. And thank you so much for being an incredible guest.
It's been a pleasure. And if anybody's got questions, just send them to me. I'm just olive@empoweringlearning.co.uk. No problem.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Olive. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
So guys, that was Olive. I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed that session, and I know that you would have, from the comments that you've said, that's still coming in, you really did enjoy what Olive had to say. She is an incredible person. As I mentioned before, we haven't even got through a quarter of the stuff that I wanted to speak to her about, but what we did cover, I'm sure you really did enjoy this. So I want to say again, a massive thank you to all of the people that support Neurodiversity Stories, previous guests, future guests, and our guest today, Olive. I'd like to also mention a massive thank you to our sponsor, Claris Software. And we will be back next Friday with another tremendous guest to entertain, to educate, and to inspire you. So take care, guys. Have an amazing weekend, and I will catch you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.